Hi everyone, welcome back. Who here was already at the AI Symposium, at least for parts of it, so we know how not to bore you best?
And you still like us, thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot for coming. Also, I didn't get any tweeted questions yet. If you still want to have a few audience questions in, I will still be monitoring my Twitter, Allison, at Allison Duettmann, and maybe you could do the same, so we can have a little bit of a town hall going on as well. But to just bring you up to speed, the AI Symposium was kind of really, I think, a really wonderful new opportunity to really dive deep into the intersection between two kind of frontiers that have been emerging kind of rather in parallel together, and that have recently, I think, become interesting enough to really merge and look at the intersection. And we had a lot of people from both crypto, AI, but also some artists there. We had panels, discussions. There were a few demos. It was a really, really wonderful, I think, pretty interactive and pretty multidisciplinary session. And I think people always say they want interdisciplinary stuff, but then when you have to do it and have to talk about the jargon, it's actually really hard to do. So we're hoping to just share a few highlights with you and dive into a few of the bits and pieces that we thought were really outstanding, and hopefully get a little bit of a back and forth going, so that those of you who haven't come can have a little bit of a digest. I think for me, 3 things that I thought were really outstanding there was one on how crypto can help AI, in the sense that there's a lot of, I think, individual problems that we'll be deep diving in as well a little bit later about identity and so forth, that is, I think, becoming much more just kind of fishy in an era of generative AI, an era of deepfakes and so forth. And I think those intersections would be really awesome if we could discuss them a little bit in depth in a little bit. But then also, I think of a little bit long term of what are the kind of data sources that AI currently cannot make use of because big data can't go there. Maybe it's local data that isn't otherwise really incentivized to be used. Maybe it's private data or sensitive data. So I'd love to also talk about a few cases there. I think the second highlight really for me was the flip side of that, of how can really AI help crypto and developers and artists in general. And here we heard from a few artists, and they were surprisingly positive about the implications of AI for their work. So I'm really excited to chat more about that. And then also, I think in general, we had a wonderful presentation on AI-assisted coding, and that really blew my mind. As a non-code writer, that sounded like an absolute boost. And then finally, I think really just helping, I think Ari pointed it out in the first presentation, to bring a little bit more ambiguity where otherwise code is perhaps a bit too restrictive, or just to kind of too easily enforced, to bring back some ambiguity, and perhaps AI and LLMs can help with that, where otherwise code would just give you a hard smart contract or just a code is law type of solution. And then finally, I think the challenges and solutions were also just really mind-boggling, in the sense that I think we will have a variety of new challenge territory to step through. Really excited to dive into that. But the opportunity space is so vast. And I think Trent really blew my mind with the sovereign intelligences talk. And then I think we're hopefully discussing a lot more the centralization, decentralization angles. So let's just dive right into it. I would love to hear, as someone, both of you obviously have an AI background, and both of you have some crypto expertise. So why do you think we're here? At this event, talking about these two topics, what has changed in the past few years that we can now have this kind of symposium at a crypto conference at this intersection? Why are we here today? Why is now a great time to do this?
Shall I take that one for us?
Go for it.
So I think the question is how did we get here? I think it was a conscious decision. It's
I would hope so.
as opposed to a reaction. And so I think it was one of the things is that in life we can make our own opportunities by making good decisions, and by kind of understanding and seeing where potential problems can arise and nipping them in the bud, getting in front of them, or just choosing to do the right thing up front. And Kemal and I are friends. We go back quite a long time, and we've worked on some really fun stuff together. And we've been talking about this for a little while. And so we really identified that the opportunities that crypto is giving developers, have just in the last, I think since the launch of functions in particular, have just the opportunities have exploded. The opportunities for developers in the field of generative AI in the last 12 months have exploded. But when there's these new green fields with so much uncertainty and so many things that, that most of us are going to be pioneers, poking into the darkness and shining our flashlights into the corners to see where, we can do things that are good, we can do things that are opportunistic, that the best way to do that is really to get in front of it. And, so we thought, hey, this conference is going on, it's called SmartCon, let's be smart and let's kind of like spend some time to, be vulnerable, to be honest, and to kind of think about where is it that our technologies are lacking, where is it that our technologies are strong, and where is it that we can like intersect these two things together for the greater good. And I think it was really born out of that passion that we were going to do this. And, and I think it's a really good thing that we're discussing that because, beyond the opportunity for gain, there's clear and obvious profit that can be made by developers or startups or companies or, like Chainlink or Google or whomever else is presenting here. But there's also the opportunities to do something different and do something good. And I find that like when we get smart people in a room in the same place to work with each other, that the distinctiveness that you have, the domain knowledge that you have in your special area, that can be inspired to come up with solutions that we would never have thought of. And that's what keeps me going every day. I didn't sleep at all last night. I'm seriously jet lagged, but I'm still energetic because I'm so excited by that stuff. And it's just been fantastic to be a part of that. And I hope it's really been as beneficial for everybody here as it was for me. How about you, Kemal? What do you think?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm very grateful for you to be involved in SmartCon. So Laurence and I go way back. And I remember when I told Laurence, hey, I'm gonna go work in blockchain and crypto and Chainlink. He was sort of a bit puzzled at the beginning, but I told him, it's a big thing. It's going to be a huge thing. And then we kept in touch, and I think at some point I came up with this sort of simplification and saying, look, AI. It's about intelligence automated at scale on demand. That's what this is.
Yeah.
And blockchain or crypto Web3, it's going to be about, you could call it incentives, organization, coordination, programmable value at scale. So think about like the smartest thing that you can automate at scale, AI agents, with unstoppable money. I mean, something's going to come out of this, right? And so that's sort of the intuition. But we started seeing this acceleration of things that you can do short term. And the first thing that we collaborated on officially was this when we had the function launch in Denver. Was the smart contract that generated art via a DALL-E model. And that was the first, okay, those two things just touched via functions. And one thing that I've really seen the acceleration, and it was visible today at the symposium, especially during the panel, is all these different building blocks that are coming together of all the things that you would need to start having those two technologies have impact today to solve the problems that we can talk about, like the authenticity problem, the identity problem, the provenance problem, the ownership problem, the intellectual property problem, all these things, they are going to start getting resolved via this, these building blocks that are coming together short term. Yeah. Well, and then there's a longer term thing, which we're all scratching our heads, honestly. It's more asking questions and having solutions this term, at this time. It's, well, wait, those things are super powerful and they're super centralized. We got to do something about that. So I think there's a short-term and long-term thing. Yeah.
And you mentioned the demo that we did for the event in Denver, and I think it's like, that was, to me, was a particularly inspiring thing because it actually solved a problem that we didn't know was going to be a problem. So, and the problem that it solved, or could potentially solve, was that ownership of copyright of art that is generated using a machine learning model like Stable Diffusion or DALL-E. You know, you probably saw the story where somebody entered a piece of art into an art competition and won, but they just created it with Stable Diffusion, and then that caused an avalanche of legal woes, which ended up with a decision being made that AI-generated art cannot be copyrightable. But in the case of what we did with this demo is like we have a server, you pass it a prompt, you pass it hyperparameters like a seed and a temperature and other stuff like that. But all of that stuff that you create to get it to generate the art is on chain and is by definition secure and owned by you. And so like if that ends up generating something beautiful, technically the pixels can't be copyrighted, but the text that you wrote can, and you have proof of ownership of that text. And we ended up doing that without realizing we were doing it, right? You know, because the problem.
No, it was on purpose.
Later,
it's totally on purpose.
It was a conscious decision.
Oh, we totally intended it. Okay, yeah. and it's just I find that kind of thing amazing. That like if you start experimenting with these kind of things, and if you start working with these kind of things, that how you know you plant some seeds and 1,000 flowers can bloom. And I just thought it was amazing.
Yeah, I think the experimentation part always came kind of like along whenever we got too much into the philosophical weeds of like potential risks and potential like long-term implications. It was like, well, you know, let's just start with what we have right now and what can we actually build. And I thought that that was a really good way to bring us back to the ground. So why don't we start there? What are like a few kind of like concrete examples where you think that blockchain or like, you know, Web3 in general could really help with AI? Like I think it would be really useful to just like give people a few of the challenges. For example, you both mentioned Eric's and Sergey's talk yesterday and like a few of the problems that are really urgently coming along vis-a-vis data provenance in the election and so forth. So maybe like tee us up there a little bit, like what could we expect here from crypto or from Web3 in general?
Sure. So we're going to repeat some of the points that we made. So for those of you who were already there when we made them, sorry, but we're going to repeat some of those things. So
that's so good that worth saying again.
Absolutely. So I think the first is really deepfakes and what's fake and what's true, and being able to tell what's fake and what's true. And you could imagine the next political campaigns or the next elections that if anybody in the world can download software very easily and generate any kind of video or image of a politician doing or saying something, that's going to create some problems, which is probably the euphemism of the day. And being able to know, okay, this didn't happen, this politician didn't say that, or they did say that, is going to be very important. We live in a time where we're pretty divided, we can't even agree on most common facts, and so being able to determine that is going to be very, very important, especially when anybody can very simply generate something that's just not true, but very believable. And that is a prime use case for blockchain, because being able to capture something on camera that's signed and then put it on chain and say, well, my device observed that on that day and this time is very important. That's the basic building block by which we're going to be able to determine, looking at a new image or a new video, does that have a signature somewhere that proves that this thing is authentic? And then we'll get into something that with oracles, we're going to be able to say, well, did multiple people verify this thing at the same time, at the same location? Do they have verified identities? Mm-hmm. Do they have some sort of reputation at stake to say that they're not collectively making this up for some very sophisticated scheme? And I think this is going to be one of the big first application of how blockchain will help AI in the age of generative AI.
Yeah, I love how you tied in the identity piece, the data piece, and then really also the reputation piece. Like, you know, those are all tools that are emerging within crypto, and like they could all collectively really like in a mutually compensating way, like benefit AI. And do you have anything to add there?
Yeah, no, I was just thinking, like, you know, in terms of building stuff at the intersection of these two, that one thing that I've been inspired to do at this conference, and actually first question's got, who here knows how to build like an AI model for natural language processing?
Okay,
One.
we have a few.
Okay, only one. If you want to learn how to build one, it's very simple. Send me a note on LinkedIn and I'll send you free access to the Coursera courses that I use to teach this stuff. And you'll see like how relatively easy it is for you to build a sentiment model. If you've got data, like for example, there's movie reviews data where this is a good review, this is a bad review, and how you can build an AI model in TensorFlow so that like, you'll train it off of that and then you put in text in the future and it can give you a calculation of whether that was positive or negative. You could build a similar type model for something that's fake news or alternative facts, I believe was the phrase used in the White House, or real news, you know, to have some kind of level of ground truth. So you can see how easy it is for you to build this kind of thing for yourself and then wrap that in an oracle. Make that a function on chain. You know, that's one of the things that I think, you know, we should start seeding examples like that. I'm going to work with the DevRel team in Chainlink to like start seeding some examples like that. So then, you know, blockchain developers, Chainlink developers, you'll see how relatively easy it is to build these kind of things. And then you could build services, you could build oracles that can be used to determine, you know, can be used to add value to existing services, like maybe deciding truth or fiction, maybe deciding, you know, maybe classifying something out, the type of news story it is, or whatever. It's really not that difficult. All you need to know is a little bit of Python, and you'll be able to pick up the rest. So it's, I think, that's going to be a use case that I think we should like really dig into, is start looking at samples of how this stuff works. You know, start peeping over the fence to how people on the other side build things. And who knows what kind of cool solutions you'll be able to come up with.
Yeah, I like the point of view of like, you know, just like getting your hands dirty in this. And I think that was also one of the conclusions that came out of our AI panel, kind of, right? Of like, you know, we had expected this kind of like, at least like somewhat challenging AI panel, or like, you know, pointing out like really the challenges with IP and some of the generative AI stuff. But then you had a quite different experience. Do you want to elaborate?
So on generative and that in particular?
Yeah, the generative AI panel, you know, even there people said that, you know, by just working with these tools, they could actually reduce a lot of the friction that they had, from, like getting up to speed with a new AI and knowledge.
The narrative that I had heard before the art panel that we had, and this was from many artists reaching out to me, being very upset about generative AI, because it's like now anybody can go type in a piece of text and they'll get a picture. But you know, to be an artist requires years of practice, knowledge of paint, knowledge of color, you know, that kind of thing. And my response is usually there's the old phrase, paint from the brush doesn't guarantee art from the bristles, if you're familiar with that phrase. Because being an artist is so much more than that. And it's one of the things that I came from the panel that we discussed that I found really inspiring, was that, you know, what the collective generally agreed on was that, you know, when we produce some kind of an output, be it a painting or be it a book or be it a script, there's the stuff that comes from within where we're expressing ourselves, there's the craft associated with that, and then there's the reception by an audience. And it's when you bring all of these things together into a superset, that's when you have art. And the generative AI doesn't challenge that, it enhances the craft part of it. And what a lot of these artists were sharing, and go watch the stream, I thought was really inspirational. I only understood half of the tools they spoke about, you know, but like what they were sharing was like how they were able to start using the tools to extend their art beyond themselves. Like, for example, things that they had created to use a thing called NERF, neural radiance fields, to turn that into a 3D model, and then from that 3D model to be able to print that out. So now, instead of an artist thinking of expressing themselves with a pencil drawing or a painting, they're actually turning that into a 3D model of their painting that people can experience, or people in a distant part of the world from where they are could download that 3D model and print it themselves and experience the art in a different place in a way that just previously wouldn't have been possible. So there's like lots of like cool things like that that I just thought, you know, is really fun. And then to protect the artists, the stuff that can be done on chain is there, right? So if there's obviously the fear of if you're an artist with a particular style. I think the example that the guy used was chicken nuggets drawn by Salvador Dali, which I really want on a t-shirt. And, you know, so it's like, you know, how would Salvador Dali protect himself in this circumstance? And, you know, again, as Kemal has been talking about, how we can start publishing data on chain, be the verified owner of that data on chain, and then the next wave of models, and I'm calling AI 3, I'm stealing Web 3 to turn into AI 3, you know, that next wave of models that are built this way will have that kind of provenance so that, you know, if somebody does create chicken nuggets by Salvador Dali or chicken nuggets by whatever style, then the original owner of that can be credited as part of the coins flowing into the model. And, you know, there's a whole series of problems that can just be solved. And I think that can not only unlock creativity, but unblock the ability of artists to be, you know, damaged by the existence of these models.
Yeah, I also thought it was really inspirational and like rather hopeful, actually, surprisingly so. To some extent.
It's also
go for it.
it's also really wonderful to as a democratization mechanism. Like one analogy would be to think about before calculators, people who were really good at numbers were really the only one who could just do accounting or things like that. And then the calculator showed up, and it sort of removed that barrier. Sure, some people who were really good at mental calculus were like, that's not fair. But it gave everyone the ability to actually make calculations. And making calculations is a lot more than just mental number in your head, right? And I think it's going to be the same here. It's to what you said about artistic expression. Everybody can go and type in, okay, I want rap music or something, or but it's one thing to type that. It's another thing to spend hours in front of the AI tool until you come with something that will actually resonate with the listeners. And that is going to be the essence of being an artist. I think it's just going to be redefined and way more accessible.
Yeah, I mean, Photoshop didn't put painters out of business. It actually made improved their craft, right? You know, that kind of thing, and this can be the same way.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be a little while, I guess, until, you know, skills really like start to solidify and start to like evolve a bit, in the sense that, like, do you remember when the first newsletters came out? I remember our newsletters in like 1986 or something, or like just when it was just possible barely to send one. It had a lot of like Comic Sans, you know, like when we had the first like ability to kind of like actually design your own stuff. It was like terrible, and so I think we'll need a little bit of time for the skills to evolve with the craft. But I think it was interesting because usually if you would ask an artist about it, maybe they wouldn't be quite as positive about the fact that it's hardcore democratizing their domain of expertise. But these artists were actually quite excited about it because it also allowed them to have less friction and to get onboarded faster to new tools. And so I thought that was a really kind of like refreshing sub point that I thought was really great. But maybe if we switch gear now to the big elephant in the room that I think came up almost in every single panel or like at every single presentation at the end, it was always this kind of like centralization, decentralization, kind of like almost, you know, a game, or like, you know, evolving set of principles. And I think I started the whole symposium with Peter Thiel's old quote of like, AI is communist, crypto is libertarian, and, you know, trying to kind of like rephrase that of like, are there kind of like middle grounds? Like, where do you see this kind of future headed with AI that through the big data, kind of like through access through big data and economies of scale is perhaps a little bit more centralizing than crypto, through the ability to like really like incentivize the contribution of local knowledge is perhaps a more decentralizing, compensating dynamic. Like, where do you see these two forces merge? How do you see like play us out a few evolutionary dynamics here, like a few rounds further? Where are we at?
Well, I can see the AI industry learning from the crypto industry, in that, you know, decentralization, distribution are really powerful, and they're really powerful forces. And because if you think about the trends in AI that we have at the moment, you know, models are getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and by definition that means they're more expensive to train and they're more expensive to operate. However, if you start then looking at, like, for example, OpenAI, when they were talking about GPT-4 in the news a little while ago, they said GPT-4 is not a single model, right? It's a collection of models. That I'm beginning to see that being the trend, that, you know, highly specialized models instead of very generalized models might be an indicator of the future. And even today, the large generalized models even have associated models that work with them, like, not to be confused with on-chain tokens, but when you're dealing with a language model, you got a tokenizer and a detokenizer, which just basically convert words into numbers and vice versa. So that the computation is already being somewhat distributed, And I think as we start seeing the real value that comes from AI models, and it was some of the stuff like, you mentioned code today, that one of the presentations that we had was that, if you're going to invest in a code generation model for your company, you probably don't want that model to also be able to write haikus or rap, right? So and then that very specialized model for that very specialized domain is going to be smaller and it's going to be nimbler. Then also, as the industry is driving towards multimodal models like text to video, text to audio, text to 3D, there's no point in having all of them smushed together into one giant model. And as a result, we're going to start seeing that smaller models and that specialization, that distribution. And I think that will be the first step towards decentralization. If you've got these humongous big models, it's hard to decentralize them. But when you've got multiple ones, then you can have that ecosystem of models where you're mixing and matching from different places. And that's when you begin those first steps towards decentralization. And,
yeah, I love that. I think you also had this really wonderful open source kind of like analogy, or like at least like pointing out some of the kind of like trade-offs of doing things open source or in a more decentralized way versus in a more monolithic, centralized way. Do you want to kind of walk us through this? You had a really, I think, very just like differentiated opinion on this that I very much enjoyed.
Sure, yeah. So I think the question is that AI is really becoming so powerful that the question becomes, can we afford to keep it centralized? And if not, what is the path to decentralization? One path that's been the driving force of giving access to more than just 4 companies really has been open sourcing. And actually Google and Meta have been really driving forces of the open source movement and releasing those models open source. But then the question becomes, okay, should we rely on those players to keep open sourcing those models? The other thing is that while those models are getting open sourced, it's like open source is getting iPhone 3 and the centralized version is like iPhone 10. And we're all, great, we have an iPhone 3, but the centralized one is the iPhone 10. And then working on iPhone 11. And then once you're at iPhone 11, then everyone in open source gets iPhone 4, right? And you see where this is going. So open source is behind those models that are centralized. So it's unclear how we're going to resolve that. One path, which is what you've described, is the technical path that those large models are starting to be composite of smaller models, which then would open the way technically for smaller models to collaborate maybe on some blockchain in some sort of mesh of incentives. That could be a direction. Another direction would be that, I joked earlier that maybe we should have a $1 billion DAO to start building a model that's owned.
This is not a launch event.
That is not a launch event.
Not yet.
But don't say that, Laurence. You don't know what's going to happen on Twitter. No, seriously, it's not a launch event. But it is a really big question that we have to tackle, and behind that there's this notion of every time we make a bigger model, it does things that surprise us. I don't know if you followed this, but the difference between, I think it was GPT-3 and 4, was that in 18 months it went from being bottom 10% in the bar exam to top 10% in like 18 months. So you can imagine the next one is going to probably be like top 1 or 0.1%, while also being the same in GMAT and everything. So the nature of this progress is just exponential, and it's surprising us. So what I'm saying is the iPhone 11 is maybe 10x better than the iPhone 10 in this analogy.
Yeah, I think we have a long, long way to go, and I'm seeing we have 30 seconds left to wrap the session up. I think we could have gone into all kinds of weeds, but I think one thing we really want to leave you with are a few action items. So can you just give us one word of what you would like people to do after this session to get involved and to drive progress at this frontier?
Functions.
Functions.
Go
Can I
use
two
functions.
words?
You may use 2 words.
Write code.
Write code, write functions. I think educate other folks, get your hands really dirty, and use, I think it was said really well, build the boring stuff.
Yeah,
Get engaged with the boring stuff, get your hands dirty. And I'm sure that, to close this out, this will be one of many conversations about this now. I'm assuming that like an AI kind of like track or something like that will be built into many following crypto events from this year onward, really latest. But thank you so much for everyone who joined. Thank you so much for everyone who came now. I hope it was somewhat useful. I certainly learned a hell of a lot. And thank you both for being such wonderful collaborators on this. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.